Today's episode was sponsored by Emily over on Patreon. And before anyone says anything, I know what you're all thinking. The F is a little bit smaller than the rest of the letters. Full disclosure, I freehanded it last night, very late, after I had a couple of glasses of wine. So hopefully you don't mind too much, Emily, but let's go ahead and get it up on the wall, shall we? Yeah. So yeah, here it is. Up on the wall. Eagle-eyed viewers will notice that it's actually upside down. That is because I sewed it on upside down accidentally, and I apologize. And like Emily, I will happily fix it for you, but I figured I'd keep it this way because maybe you'd want to be like the one who has her patch upside down. I don't know, it could be fun. But I also understand if not, so let me know and I will fix it if you would like me to. I asked Emily if she had any special messages she wanted me to say, and she did, and they are that I should shout out her two favorite episodes of mine, which are The Most Problematic Christmas Movie I've Ever Seen, and The Time Bones Discuss Bisexuality in Art. Which, yeah, you can check those out. I'll link to them below. Which, yeah. Can I just take a second to say, y'all are awesome? That is like the second or third time that's happened where someone has paid me to shout myself out. I feel very lucky sometimes when I think about when I think about my channel. Pretty cool. So yeah, thank you very much, Emily. Seriously, let me know if you want me to fix the patch. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start the episode. So I've actually wanted to make this video for a while now. Like a while. I've wanted to do it for so long, in fact, that I got to the point where I waited too much and the topic became dated, so I shelved it. Recently, though, it was announced that King of the Hill is going to be revived by Hulu, and it's also seeming increasingly likely that Trump will be elected to another term as president, so yeah, it felt topical again. Hooray! And yeah, I'm not exaggerating when I say I've been sitting on this for a while. I first wanted to do it all the way back in 2016 when Trump first got elected, so it's been 8 years. Jesus Christ. Back then, I pitched it as an article for my old job, and the only reason I didn't write it is that it was flatly rejected by every last person I worked with. Generally speaking, my coworkers didn't really think that there was an article there, because in their minds, the answer was an obvious no. And they aren't the only ones. I've had this conversation with many fans of the show in the years since then, and very rarely does anybody say, yeah, I think he would be. What an interesting conversation you've started, Willie. I value your friendship. Also, you're very handsome. More often than not, people honestly seem a little bit offended by the question. I think that a lot of people view Hank Hill as one of the goodest characters to ever exist, so to sully his name by even asking such a thing seems to spit in the face of everything that they hold true in the world. And I get it. I love Hank Hill. I think he's a kind, intelligent, well-meaning, fake person, but that said, I don't think that the answer is that clear-cut. For every argument against the idea that he would support Trump that I've heard, I think there's an equally strong argument in favor of it. And to show you what I mean, I'm going to go through each one of those arguments, one by one, in more detail than I probably should. And I'll start with the one I hear the most often, which is that Hank Hill doesn't hate gay people. I'm not joking, that's the one I hear the most. In the season 6 episode, My Own Private Rodeo, Hank and his friends Bill and Boomhauer unwittingly find themselves at a gay rodeo, and while Bill and Boomhauer both giggle at the sight of two boys kissing, Hank is actually very respectful.
Yeah, man. Good one, man. All right, they're gay. Ha ha ha.
As the episode continues, they learn that his friend Dale's father is secretly gay, and Hank is cordial with him throughout in a way that leads me to believe that he has no issue with his sexual orientation. And I get why people point to this episode so often, because not only is it one of the clearer examples of Hank giving his opinions on social issues, but it also very much sticks out in your mind as a longtime viewer of the show. I think at the time that the episode came out, it probably would have been expected that Hank wouldn't be cool with gay shit. So the fact that he is a good reminder that you can't judge a book by its cover. Just because he's from Texas and just because he's old-fashioned, that doesn't mean he's going to believe certain things. That said, though, I don't think that Hank not being homophobic is proof positive that he wouldn't be a Trump supporter, because, well, for one thing, Hank was totally homophobic. Honestly, when people have used the Hank's not homophobic argument, it makes me feel like we were watching different shows, because I would argue that that's actually a huge part of his character. It's just that his homophobia is mostly directed towards his son Bobby. Hank and Bobby's relationship is at the core of King of the Hill. If you were to ask me to boil the plot of the show down to a single sentence, I'd say that it's about an old-fashioned father trying to raise his son in an ever-modernizing world. And though it's never said outright, I do think that the elephant in the room of that relationship is Hank's fear that Bobby might be gay. His catchphrase is, "That boy ain't right," and there is at least one time where "ain't right" is explicitly used as a synonym for homosexual.
I like Jeff Gordon. He's handsome.
Bobby, you joke around like that in public, people are gonna think you ain't right.
In the season 4 episode, Naked Ambition, Bobby gets caught shirtless in his girlfriend's bedroom, and after Hank finds out about it, he breathes a literal sigh of relief.
Last night, I catch Bobby half naked in Connie's room.
Bobby?
Truth about your little boy, not so pretty after all, is it, Hank Hill? He girl-crazy sex fiend.
Well, that boy's gonna get a talking to, I tell you what.
And it's not just Bobby's hypothetical orientation he seems worried about. Hank also has extremely stringent views on his son's gender expression as well.
There better be a naked cheerleader under your bed.
Don't get mad, but I think I'm gonna fail home ec.
Well, of course you're failing home ec. You're a guy.
The one obvious exception to this is the season 12 episode Powder Puff Boys, where Hank actually encourages Bobby to dress in drag so that he can participate in a school football tradition, but he only seems on board with it because it gets him one step closer of his son being on the football team, and he also makes it very clear that it is a one-time thing.
Thanks for making me dress up like a girl, Dad.
You know that after this is over, you can't do this anymore, right?
Oh, I know.
I guess I can't say this for sure, but Bobby's reaction there suggests to me that Hank has hammered it into him that boys are boys and girls are girls, and those lines are not to be blurred. Hank's main goal throughout the series is to try and raise Bobby to be his interpretation of a good man, and though I don't think it's malicious necessarily, I do think that it's safe to say that that interpretation is not queer. Which is not to say that I think Hank wouldn't love Bobby unconditionally and eventually learn to accept him. Like even in that cheerleader clip I showed you, he very quickly learns to support his son's interest in home economics.
This circular saw cozy fits great, son, but could we call it something else?
Hey, how about a circular saw buddy?
You name it, and I'll knit it.
I just think that it would probably be a hurdle, and Hank seems like he's gonna do everything that he can to make sure that he never has to cross that hurdle. And in this way, I feel like he's actually totally in line with a lot of Trump supporters. The version of homophobia I hear most often from them is, we don't hate gay people, just leave our kids out of it. They operate under this weird impression that if you can keep queerness away from your child, then that will maybe make it so that your child doesn't turn out as queer. And despite not being actively hostile to the gay people he comes across, it does seem to me like Hank harbors that view as well. Although that said, if it's any consolation, Peggy is one of our nation's fiercest allies. Maybe I'm overthinking this. In fact, I know that I am. It's a fucking cartoon from the 90s, but I could totally imagine an episode of King of the Hill where Hank finds out that a drag queen read a story at Bobby's school and has a problem with it. Granted, that episode would inevitably end with Hank talking to the drag queen and finding common ground, but I think that's only because, well, it's a sitcom. I think that a lot of real-world Trump supporters would probably find common ground with a drag queen if they talked to one too, but they just won't ever talk to one. That's not how fear-mongering works. A lot of shit like this is born from people pointing at these unknown others and saying, look how scary they are, and that just ends up creating even bigger divides, which only serve to strengthen the party line. And this actually brings me to my next talking point, which is that Hank very much seems to be towing said party line. The second most frequent argument people have pointed to in trying to tell me that Hank wouldn't be a Trump supporter is the season 5 episode, The Perils of Pulling. In it, he shakes hands with George W. Bush, and because the candidate has a weak handshake, Hank goes from effusively supporting him to refusing to vote entirely. He ultimately does end up going to the polls, but it's only to teach his niece Luann the importance of voting. The way the episode resolves, it makes it seem like Bush never regains Hank's support. And when people point to that episode, their argument is something along the lines of Hank turned on Bush over a handshake. Trump would have lost him way sooner. And it's true, on paper, Donald Trump is the antithesis of everything that Hank Hill represents. But I don't think that things are that simple, because, well, Trump is the antithesis of everything that a lot of his supporters represent. But they still support him. Though it shows Hank's willingness to turn on a less than stellar candidate, the episode also gives us a few insights into his character, which do feel like checks in the pro-Trump column. First and foremost, it reinforces that he is a lifelong Republican, which, for a lot of people, that alone was all it took to get them on the Trump train.
Close your eyes and listen to the issues. Wait till you hear him call for lower taxes and a stronger national defense.
Hank also says that what he likes about Bush is his emphasis on national security and lower taxes, and I don't know, it's hard for me to say for sure that this puts him in line with Trump, because it's very difficult to get a clear read on what any of the candidates actually believe nowadays, and also a lot of what Trump says is inscrutable. But I think that if those are your issues, you'd probably go for Trump in every election he's run in, particularly if you consider a border wall national security. That said, though, I also don't know that Hank is that much of an issues-based voter. I think that was kind of the point of the episode. He's more interested in the idea of Bush as a person than his actual policies. So then the question becomes, would he be interested in Trump as a person? And it feels like the obvious answer should be, of course not. Hank Hill would not be interested in grabbing a beer with a rich, entitled, pompous New Yorker. He hates every word of that sentence. Again, though, I don't think it's that simple. Like him or not, you can't deny that Donald Trump has managed to connect with a large group of people who by all logic should hate his guts, and I think it's entirely possible that Hank could be one of them. Like, if there's one thing that Hank hates more than rich New Yorkers, it's Hollywood actors, but he fucking loves Ronald Reagan. At one point, he says of the Gipper,
I miss voting for that man.
and in his admiration, he's willing to overlook certain aspects of his presidency that he seemingly disagrees with.
You've been there for years.
Since Ronald Reagan kicked me out of my mental hospital.
Well, it was complicated, Spongy.
And Ronald Reagan isn't the only person whose flaws Hank seems willing to overlook. I would argue that the person he idolizes the most is also the closest analog to Trump on the show, and that's his boss, Mr. Strickland.
Mr. Strickland, I love you.
Buck Strickland is a rich, obnoxious, self-involved grifter with an extensive criminal record. He's basically just Trump with a Texas accent. And don't get me wrong, he definitely expresses disapproval over the way Mr. Strickland lives his life, but there's still never really been a time where Hank didn't remain fiercely loyal to his employer. And Mr. Strickland has been pretty awful to Hank. At one point, Buck tries to frame him for murder. And Hank still enthusiastically works for him for another 9.5 seasons. And there are a whole host of complicated reasons for why this is. For one thing, it's heavily implied that Hank's complicated relationship with his own dad has led him to view Mr. Strickland as a surrogate father figure, so that's definitely part of it. It's also suggested that Mr. Strickland's moral decay is a relatively recent development, and at one point he was a decent man, so it could also be that Hank is more idolizing the person that he was than the person that he currently is. That said, though, I think that the main explanation is a lot simpler. Mr. Strickland is Hank's boss, and Hank fucking loves his job. For those of you who don't know, Hank works in propane and propane accessories. Not really sure how you'd make it this far into this video if you didn't know that, but it's important, so I'll say it anyway. And to say that Hank loves propane is an understatement. Propane is Hank's reason for being. He talks about it constantly, he smiles whenever he brings it up. At one point there was an episode where he was having sex dreams about it, which was kind of weird. And Mr. Strickland gave that to him. He plucked Hank out of Jeans West and gave his life meaning, and that more than anything is why he seems to view his boss with rose-colored glasses. I think that Hank is willing to overlook Mr. Strickland's many faults because he agrees with his ultimate message, and that message is propane. So the question then becomes, would Hank agree with Trump's message too? And while I can't say yes for sure, I do think that it's a definite possibility. I actually feel like Hank would be very on board with the idea of Make America Great Again. Not only is it just a reheated version of Ronald Reagan's Make America Great slogan, but it also very much speaks to Hank as a character. Like I said, much of the show's conflicts revolve around Hank struggling to adjust to modernity. He is someone who has a great nostalgia for an America that never was, and he's constantly being bombarded by a bunch of unwelcome reminders that that's not the America he currently lives in. I think that when a candidate came along and said, let's go back to the way this country used to be, Hank would be very interested to hear what they had to say. Provided he actually believed the words that were coming out of their mouth. A major caveat to everything I'm saying right now is that Trump didn't just come out of nowhere. He was a very public figure for years before he rose to the presidency, and his persona was extremely antithetical to everything he claimed to stand for as a candidate. I think that Hank would know this and have a less than favorable opinion of Trump going in. So, while I do think that he'd probably agree with the message, I can't say for sure that he'd believe that message if it were coming out of Trump's weird lips. That said, though, I do think it's entirely possible that Trump could gain Hank's trust for the mere fact that Hank is very trusting. I'm reminded of the season 12 episode, The Accidental Terrorist, where Hank believes that his car salesman has been giving him a super secret deal for years, only to find out that he's being duped into overpaying.
Well, what can I say, Hank? I'm a salesman.
I know, you're a salesman. That's why none of this makes any sense.
Trump is essentially just a salesman. He's managed to find a message that appeals to a demographic and communicate it in a way that really resonates with them. For some reason. And given that Hank does fit pretty comfortably into said demographic, I think it's entirely possible that he could get swept up in all that bullshit. That said, though, of everything that I say today, this is probably the point that I feel the least confident in, because Hank's level of gullibility varies greatly from episode to episode. Depending on what role the writers need him to play, his bullshit detector can be non-existent, or it can be highly sensitive, so it could just as easily be the case that Hank would see Trump coming from a mile away. And this actually brings me to my final talking point, because a lot of people's argument that Hank wouldn't be a Trump supporter is as simple as he's too smart for that. And that's obviously a very broad statement, so before I tackle it, I'm going to talk about a sub-argument I hear a bunch that's related to it, and that's that Hank is too smart for conspiracy theories. There is a very vocal subsection of Trump supporters who are driven by insane conspiracy theories such as QAnon, so people will often argue against the idea that Hank would support Trump by pointing out that he's largely immune to such ways of thinking. And it's true, Hank has demonstrated time and time again that he's clear-headed and logical. We've seen him interact with many conspiracy theories over the course of the series by way of his friend Dale, and he thinks they're all asinine. His words.
First, they fatten us up with all those 2-for-1 pizza coupons. Then when we're too logy to put up a fight, they sell us off to the Red Cross, who removes our kidneys, which go back on the pizzas to start the process all over again.
Did you mean for all those words to come out together, or did they just fall out randomly?
I would argue that there's one sort of exception to this, though, and that's the season 5 episode Helenium. It follows Hank as he navigates the upcoming Y2K rollover, and at the start of the episode, he treats all the people panicking around him as ridiculous.
That's crazy. Everyone's known about the millennium for almost a year now. You know, I have on good authority from Texas Propane Association Commissioner Murray Hogarth, personal friend, that there will be no disruption of essential services.
As the new year draws closer, though, Hank gets sucked into the hysteria and ends up panicking more than almost anyone. He gets rid of all of his electronics, he starts hoarding, and he even turns his back on his customers.
Forgive me, Lord, for what I'm about to do.
And obviously this isn't quite the same thing as a conspiracy theory. Nobody knew what would happen on Y2K, and a lot of very trustworthy people said to be on your toes. So at the time, the possibility that something might happen felt very real. That said, though, conspiracy theories also feel very real to the people who believe them, so if Hank were to become one of those people, who knows what paths that might lead him down. Which, look, if I were a betting man, I'd probably put my money on Hank not becoming a conspiracy theorist, but that said, I still think that would be a bet. I feel like it's hard to use the fact that Hank didn't believe Dale's conspiracy theories as proof that he wouldn't be sucked in by Trump bullshit, because I feel like those are two entirely different beasts. Honestly, I don't even know if Dale would believe the Trump conspiracy theories, because at their core, they require you to have faith in an American president, and I don't see Dale doing that under any circumstances. Hank, on the other hand, he has always shown a great amount of respect for the office of the presidency. He was even excited to meet Jimmy Carter, and Lord knows he didn't vote for that man.
You must be Hank.
You ran our country. America.
Hank also puts a lot of stock in the words of the people he respects. Going back to the Y2K episode, the only reason Hank isn't panicking with everyone else is because someone he believes in told him that things are going to be okay, and it's only when he finds out that Murray Hogarth was lying that he actually starts to panic.
What? But you promised me there are procedures in place.
If Hank were to see someone he respected as much as a United States president spewing the kind of bullshit Trump did on a daily basis, I think it's entirely possible that he'd have faith in it. But provided he still respected the office of the presidency once Trump got elected, which, again... That said, though, it's not just Trump saying this shit. It's a lot of people that we used to be able to trust. Honestly, I feel like the answer to everything I've been asking today kind of boils down to one simple question, and that's where does Hank Hill get his news from? And this honestly might negate every other argument I've made today, because I feel like the only concrete thing I can say about this is that he's sometimes depicted as reading the newspaper. We know from the season 13 episode, Lost in MySpace, that he doesn't really have any interest in social media, so I guess it's also unlikely that he'd find himself lost down some weird Facebook rabbit hole. Which is good. But yeah, other than that, there's not a lot I can think of that would tell me one way or another where Hank is getting his information, and like... If he is going to the wrong place, that could very well lead him down certain paths. And obviously, since nothing I'm about to say can be substantiated, this is going to be speculation for a little bit. But that said, ask yourself, does Hank seem to you like he could be someone who watches Fox News? He does to me, so... The only knock against this I can think of is that he keeps the regular Fox network blocked when football isn't in season, but like, even the Fox Corporation viewed Fox News as an entirely separate entity when they sold it to Disney, so like, I don't know if that proves anything. I guess I can't really picture him enjoying Tucker Carlson, but then again, I can't really picture anyone enjoying Tucker Carlson, so... He's sure as shit not sitting down to MSNBC at the end of the long day selling propane, and, well, I guess it could be that he prefers CNN or local news or no news at all. My gut is still saying Fox. It certainly wouldn't be weird if he watched it. A lot of people watch Fox News. Like an upsetting amount of people. And seeing that as a white male Republican of a certain age, Hank is right in their target demographic, I think it's entirely possible that he could be one of them. And if he is, which, again, emphasis on if, that alone might be all it took to get Hank riding the Trump wagon. That entire network has been designed around propping the asshole up for years now. A poll taken in 2023 said that 91% of Fox News viewers believe that Trump committed no crimes, which is insane to me. Like, even if I had no clue who he was and I just saw him on the street, I'd definitely look at him and think like, oh yeah, that motherfucker has definitely committed some crimes. And that's honestly why the whole he's too smart for that argument doesn't hold a lot of water for me, because I don't really think that anyone is too smart for that. Like I've said many times over the course of this video, Hank has shown a lot of difficulty adjusting to an ever-changing world, and like, most of that happened during the 90s and early 2000s. The past 2 decades since then feel like they were designed to systematically destroy our brains. So much has happened, and so much has changed, and there's so much goddamn information flying at us all at once that it can honestly feel impossible sometimes to even know where to look anymore. And if for some reason you find yourself looking in the wrong place, it can lead to you buying into some pretty psychotic shit that maybe you wouldn't have if you had the luxury of stepping back and taking a deep breath and looking at the world more objectively. Couple that with an abundance of ghouls whose sole goal is trying to get you to believe the psychotic shit for their own personal gain, and it kind of makes me think that under the wrong set of circumstances, anybody could be a Trump supporter. So yeah, do I think that Hank is? No, probably not. He's a character on a TV show, so ultimately he is whatever the writers say that he is. And when they bring him back for this revival, I sincerely doubt that they'd ever turn such a beloved character into something so divisive. That said, though, based on what I've seen of the show, do I think that Hank Hill, as presented to us, could be a Trump supporter? I do, yeah. I certainly think that the seeds are there. One thing that I've been very much dancing around this entire video is the fact that King of the Hill ended in 2010. It's impossible to say if Hank Hill would be a Trump supporter because Trump supporters weren't really a thing during the time he existed. When King of the Hill premiered, it was satirizing a very specific kind of person, and I hate to say it, but I don't think that that person exists anymore. Over the past couple of decades, the banal conservative boomer has either been driven further to the right or forced to learn how to get with the times. And as a result, I feel like the Hank Hills of the world have kind of gone extinct. And I would love to believe that if he were around today, Hank would be calling people by their preferred honorifics and telling everyone to get vaccinated as a part of their civic duty, but I think odds are just as good that he'd be complaining about all the blue-haired jackasses of the world and threatening to kick someone's ass when they told him to put on a mask. I think it could have started innocently enough, you know. He started watching Fox News because he wanted to know what was going on in the world, and he liked the cut of Chris Wallace's jib. But then things just went downhill from there. Obama got elected, and suddenly his brain was being constantly flooded by the words of talking heads telling him that the president was ushering in a new era of socialism that threatened to undo everything that Ronald Reagan fought so hard for during the Cold War. Suddenly, he starts feeling a little on edge, and when 2016 rolls around, he's eager for a change. He's not super pumped about the idea of the guy from The Apprentice having his finger on the button, but he learned his lesson in not voting back in 2000, and one thing's for goddamn sure, Hank Hill ain't voting for Hillary Clinton. Plus, he does want to see a Republican back in power, so he reluctantly starts to listen to what Trump has to say, and even though he thinks he sounds like a jackass half the time, he does agree with a lot of it. Trump gets elected, and Hank keeps staying informed by Fox, and slowly he goes from reluctantly voting for him to genuinely kinda liking the guy. He hears him citing the Bible as his favorite book, and watches as he hugs the American flag, and in his trusting nature, Hank views those as genuine. Then COVID hits, and everyone's brain collectively breaks, and who the hell knows where things go from there? I don't really see Hank storming the Capitol or anything, but I can certainly see Bobby trying to think of a way to not have to come home for Thanksgiving. When I think about the arguments I had with my coworkers all those years ago, I think that the reason they were so adamant that Hank wouldn't be a Trump supporter is because they didn't want to believe it. The show does a really good job at making Hank feel like a real person, but more than that, it does a really good job at making him feel like a good person. So I think that the idea that he could lose his way like that is genuinely kind of scary. But that's how it happened for a lot of people, and I think that we forget about that sometimes. I know I do. When I think about Trump supporters, I think about big screaming crowds at a rally, and completely ignore the fact that each one of the faces in that crowd is a person with their own story to tell about how they got there. And like, I'm not entirely sure what to do with that information. I'm kind of past the point where I'm still willing to try and sympathize with a Trump supporter on any level. Even the ones who I think are being taken advantage of can still go fuck themselves at this point. That said, though, I also know that I'm in a pretty privileged position. I'm lucky to say that I don't really have any Trump supporters in my life, but I know that that's not really the case for a lot of you guys watching. And that sucks. My heart genuinely breaks for everyone who had a wedge put between them and their loved ones by that orange weirdo, but I don't know. If what I'm saying today is true, then maybe there's a glimmer of hope. Because if Hank Hill is a Trump supporter, then maybe that means that some Trump supporters are Hank Hill. And say what you will about him, but Hank Hill was always capable of change. He may have been bullheaded and dragged his feet a little bit, but on the rare occasion when he was in the wrong, by the end of the episode, Hank always came around to the right side. And yeah, that's my video. Please like and subscribe and share and comment and watch my old videos. Maybe check out my shorts that I've been making and probably won't make again after this month, but we'll see. If you guys check them out and like them, maybe I'll keep making them, but they seem to be hurting my standing in the algorithm, so probably not the smartest thing for me to keep doing. Also, I hate them. And if you really want to support the channel and have a few bucks to spare, then consider donating to my Patreon or giving me a super thanks, which, speaking of, I have some super thanks to super thanks back. Super thank you to Mix Piggy. I'm really bad. It's MX Piggy, but it's like the non-binary Miss or Mister. I still don't know how to pronounce that, but that's, thank you very much. I should learn how to pronounce that. Mix, I think it's Mix, because it's like Latinx. Comment below. Also, Witch Jazzy and White Alley 5893. Thank you guys so much. And yeah, that's the video. I feel like people are gonna get, I'm more scared for this comment section than any comment section I've ever had before. If my viewers are anything like the straight male comedy boys that I used to work with, they do not like when you say things about Hank Hill that they disagree with. So this should be fun. End of video. Just kidding, I'm still here. I have the last part to do, which is where you know what it is if you're still watching this. I don't know why you would be, but people do, and I'll keep doing it. So yeah, I'm gonna post for a thumbnail, and patrons' names are gonna scroll, so when you see these names, look at them and be like, hey, those people help support this channel that I like. They're good. And so for this thumbnail, I think I'm gonna call it like, would Hank Hill be a Trump supporter? A deep dive. And so I guess I'll just be like, would he? I don't know. It's weird. Thumbnails are so weird because like I need to think about this because like I'll probably have like Hank here, and then like unfortunately I'll probably put a picture of Trump here, which I don't want to do, but like the other thought was like Hank wearing a MAGA hat, which seems like worse somehow. I don't know. So yeah, I don't know how to advertise this, but I'm talking about Trump, so I guess I need to use Trump. So, but doing the thumbnail, I like do this, and it's like, oh, how am I going to get both pictures on and make, so, although I guess if this is Trump, then like Nah. Politics. But maybe I could do like this, like, Would he? Let's ponder the question, shall we? I like this because it covers, it blocks my old mansion. Old mansion, not old mansion. I wish I had an old mansion. What is my life? Why am I still talking? Pose, Willie, pose. Let's have an argument. Let's have an argument that you didn't really win, Willie, because you kind of just said that sure he could be because everyone could be. Um, That's less thinking and more like posing. Would he? And then, like, I don't know, maybe like a short. Hmm. Hmm. I totally forgot what I was doing. I'll be honest, my cat. So my cat woke me up at like 4 a.m. and then he just wanted the part of the bed that I was sleeping on. So he took it, and then I didn't want to disturb him because my cat rules. And so I stayed up from like 4 a.m. to like 7 trying to fall back asleep because I couldn't get comfortable without disturbing my cat. Saying it out loud, it sounds kind of insane, but I have a really good cat, so. But yeah, I'll just call it there. Probably just use something. I don't know. I'm sure I have a photo to use. Now I need to figure out how to advertise content about Trump that doesn't seem awful. Whatever. Goodbye.